that usually doesn't work. If you've seen it in kids, you've seen it in people. So, into this world comes the rise of Islam. This event reshapes just about everything. It changes the course of the world. The Muslims rapidly expand. They go from Arab tribesmen that were in disorganized society to a united army that conquers a significant portion of the known world in the next 100 years. They will eventually spread out all the way across North Africa, taking all of the territory that formerly belonged to the Roman Empire. So from Morocco west. They expand east into Iran and Afghanistan. They expand north into Israel, Syria, Jordan, all of those countries along there, eastern Turkey. They expand further north and a bit east toward Georgia and Armenia and the Caucasus region. They extend south into Yemen and Oman on the end of the peninsula. They jump across the, I think that's the Red Sea on the west side of the peninsula, and they move into Somalia and Ethiopia and modern-day Sudan. They extend rapidly and become a somewhat unstoppable force. Many formerly Christian cities are no longer under Christian control. And the life of Muhammad and the rise of Islam are a bit of a mess. It's challenging because they're not always super hostile toward Christians right away. In fact, they take over a lot of countries, and many, if not most, of the people were still Christian. But they start posing administrative burdens that Islam becomes the religion of the government, and they start trying to advance it by force. Muhammad's life is difficult. This is even true of Muslim historians. Most of them won't talk about it. Lots of people today kind of get an airbrushed version. But if you listen to Christian converts from Islam, in a lot of cases, what ends up converting them is the difference between Muhammad as a founder of Islam and Jesus as the founder of Christianity. Because they're very, very different directions, very, very different people. They operate in very, very different worlds. Under Islam, there's a united group that gets ruled by a person who's called the Caliph. And the caliphs want a unified system, religion at the service of politics. So you have the fusion of church and state. There's not the religious hierarchy that's outside of state hierarchy. In the early Muslim history, it's fused, it's united. Later caliphs work on standardizing the life of Muhammad. There's actually another mess of things because the Quran, I think, means recitation or to recite. And what happened is there were people that supposedly had very good memories that would memorize what Muhammad was saying, and they would continue to recite it. The challenge is that they didn't all recite the same things, and so the later caliph he tries to collect all of the copies of the Quran in existence, and then basically burns the ones he doesn't like. There's a textual standardization that happens in the time of the early caliphs. And there's major issues with it. That different people had different memories of what Muhammad said. There were different numbers of chapters. There were different kinds of stories in them. Sometimes Muhammad says different things. And if you've ever played the game of telephone, that shouldn't surprise you, because even people with good memories who really work at it, they can remember a lot, but they didn't have all exactly the same. Like one of the great stories of the Vietnam War came out in this book on resilience that I was listening to, and the Vietnamese agreed to give up one prisoner, and the American prisoners picked this guy to be the first one to go back because he had memorized the name and rank and serial number of every American POW that was being held by the Vietnamese. And I think it was something like 600 of them. And so he knew who they were, he knew their names, he knew their army numbers, and he could say in a lot of cases where they were being held, because Vietnam was officially denying these people were still alive, that they were killed. And he said, no, they're actually here. And that ended up being one of the major breakthroughs that led to the release of Vietnam POWs, is the Americans got a guy out who knew them all. So there are people with good memories. But in the case of the Quran, it's not perfect. So Muhammad himself, he's born around the year 570. He's an Arabian tribesman. He's a traitor. He begins to have visions in a cave when he's 40. He claims an angel appears to him and orders him to recite. That's where the Quran comes from. The Muslims sort of believe that the Quran was complete and descended from God and wasn't changed by Muhammad at all. It's problematic. He develops a religious system with one God. And he seems to have been somewhat familiar with biblical texts, but he reads them in a different direction. So in the Bible, the covenant history follows from Abraham to Isaac. Ishmael is listed, but he's sort of cast out because he's the son of a slave woman. In Muslim history, they trace their lineage to Abraham through Ishmael. And so, in a sense, what you have is Ishmael versus Isaac. Who is the son of the covenant? For the Muslims, it's Ishmael. For the Christians, it's Isaac. For the Christians and Jews. They believe that there is one God and Muhammad is his prophet. That's the first of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's called the Shahada. It's a prayer that they say every day and all the time. Islam itself means submission. Islam means submission, and they have a kind of, in Islam, God is very distant from us. So one of the big challenges, you kind of have to feel the weight of this. In Christianity, God comes to us. He declares that He's a Father. You're invited into a relationship to come to know and to love and to serve God out of love. In Islam, God is so far above us that He is like very, very distant from us. There's not a lot of love in mainstream Islam. You find some of it if you get into a branch called Sufism, but we're going to run out of time to talk about the divisions in Islam. That will have to be for another day. But for the most part, Islam as a religious system isn't about loving God. It's about submission. So to be a good Muslim, you do the right things. There are prayers 5 times a day. You have to perform certain actions. There's all these rituals. You have to recite portions of the Quran. It's about what you do. Because it's not about does God love you. It's not even really, oddly enough for us in the West, it's not even really do you believe it. In Islam, it doesn't matter so much what you believe, it's about what you do. It's about your deeds. And this actually becomes one of the ways that terrorists grow and terrorism grows. They ensnare people. Because if you listen to the appeal of the terrorists, they say that if you die fighting the enemy, in this case they call the enemy like the United States and Christianity and all sorts of other things, but if you die fighting the enemy, you go straight to heaven. And their appeal are to people that haven't lived good lives and have committed lots of sins. Because in Islam, there's not the same kind of forgiveness of sin. So if your bad deeds outweigh your good ones, let's say you live a dissolute life for a while and you're not following the teachings of the Prophet and you're not doing what you're supposed to, you've accumulated lots of bad deeds. And then if you spend a year doing good ones, it doesn't outweigh your bad ones. So you still go to hell. It's a very fatalistic system, fatalist in the sense of fate, like what someone is predestined to do, the weight of your deeds, the weight of those kinds of things. And you have to feel that a little bit because you can see, or hopefully you understand, Christianity as a contrast. Part of the attractiveness of Christianity is that God is not so distant from us. It's not just about submission. It's actually about loving Him. It's about a relationship. There's real forgiveness of sin. There's real redemption. We have the example of the thief who lived a bad life, was probably a murderer, probably fomented rebellion, and is dying next to Jesus on the cross. And Jesus promises him paradise because he confesses his sins. And he asks for forgiveness. That's an example that Islam doesn't have. Muhammad overtly rejects some Christian teachings. So part of the Quran says God is one, He is not three, and He has not been begotten. He is uncreated. That's an attack on Jesus. That's a difference of opinion about who Jesus is. They still have Jesus. Jesus is still a prophet of God. In fact, oddly enough, which doesn't make sense to me, Jesus is the one who will come at the end of time and restore all things, not Muhammad, even in Islam. But Jesus isn't God. That's one of the dividing lines. So Muhammad is forced out of Mecca. Mecca was where he was living, and he travels to Medina, and the people in Medina welcome him. And then he goes back and he slaughters the Meccans. There's lots of times where Muhammad does things that are troubling and problematic. You can certainly listen to stories about it. And here, I'm not trying to just throw him under the bus. I think his life is complicated. Certainly something happened. And I'm not trying to be discriminatory, just trying to narrate that there's difficulties in his life. There's times where he has people killed. He takes a 9-year-old girl to be one of his wives. In the modern world, that's very problematic. In the ancient world, that was far more normal. Then there's a challenge of succession. When Muhammad dies, he's plotting a campaign. I think he was plotting a campaign to take Jerusalem, and he dies. And so there is a challenge of succession. There's two people, Abu Bakr, who's a rich merchant and father-in-law. He's got money. Guess who's going to win this battle? Abu becomes the first caliph, who's a dictator, a successor of the Prophet. Abu Bakr names a man named Umar to be the next caliph. This is actually where one of the major separations in Islam happens, because there is a family member. Oh, I didn't write it down. Darn. There's a family member of Muhammad who is sort of around, named Ali, and he becomes a leader of the group called the Shia Muslims, and the Sunni Muslims, which is the majority. Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Iran and Iraq are Shiite. But there's this conflict even within Islam about who the leader is. It turns out that the majority of Muslims follow the rich guy with the money. Umar is the one who sets about conquering the rest of Arabia and onto the world. Islam was a religion that Muhammad explicitly declares can be spread by the sword. Christians have an uneasy history with that principle. The Crusaders certainly thought that that was okay. Modern Christianity would say absolutely not. It's not quite as clear. Can you kill people who refuse to become Christian? So the Byzantine Empire was devastated by plague. Lots of people had died. There's this conflict with the Persians. They're in a weakened state. And all of a sudden on their border marches in a giant army that's organized and intense and they start burning things to the ground. So the Muslims defeat the Byzantines at the Battle of the Yarmouk River in August of 636. Jerusalem is taken by Umar's forces. He builds the first mosques. The Muslims want to claim Jerusalem as their own. They're very, very cautious that if Jerusalem remains in Christian hands, people are going to become Christian. They're going to see it as a sign of the victory of the Christian God over everyone else. So we're going to take Jerusalem. And then they end up destroying the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Basilica of the Anastasis that Constantine had built, and they begin building some of the mosques that are in Jerusalem. I think some of those might remain. There's changes. There's a new language, Arabic. There's new traditions. Tribal customs are chucked to the wind. They rule by violence. Not violent immediately, but this is part of Islam. Non-Muslims have to pay a special tax. And it's a little bit complicated because it's like, is it a worse tax than the Muslims have to pay? Hard to say. But it's called the jizya, and they're certainly second-class citizens. They certainly move down the social ladder. They start forcing Islamization over time. They build the Dome of the Rock, a beautiful building to rival the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Muslim rulers start to become more and more concerned about Christians and their churches, so they start destroying them because they don't want Muslims to leave Islam. The Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire, the Sasanians, were exhausted from fighting each other. So by 632, the Muslims ruled all of the Arabian Peninsula. 29 years later, they control Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Iran, Caucasus, and parts of Turkey. Like their empire triples in size in 29 years. They have significant military advances in every direction. By 750, they've conquered the rest of North Africa out to the Atlantic Ocean. They cross into Spain and they conquer Spain. They're finally defeated, I think around the year 750-ish, by Charles Martel, who becomes a hero of the French, the Frankish kings, the Carolingian kings. And the Song of Roland is written down. It's a ballad. It's an epic poem. It's about that battle where the Christians defeat the Muslims in Spain. And that's actually the first significant victory against the Muslim forces in the world. And that begins the process of finally pushing them out of Spain that takes another 750 years. The 5 pillars of Islam: there is one God and Muhammad is his prophet, to pray 5 times a day, to give zakat, which is 2.5% of your income, to charity, to fast, especially during Ramadan, that's sun up to sundown, and to make a pilgrimage called the Hajj, if you are financially able to, at least once in your life. Islam is a religion about what you do, not what you believe. A good Muslim does the deeds of religion. And some of them, you know, it's hard because some of them behave in very admirable ways. I mean, Islam isn't a completely lacking substance kind of system. There's some meat to it. It's a very different system, but it's certainly not without effects in the lives of some people. We talked about it being fatalism. God is beyond anything human. God doesn't have to be reasonable. So in one verse he can say, love them, and the next verse he can say, kill them. And Muslims would say it's logically consistent because God doesn't have to behave according to the principles of human reason. Which, again, if you can hear the echoes in Christianity, we talk about Jesus as the Logos, Jesus as the Word of God. That principle, Gospel of John, bedrock of Christianity. God's reason operates in the same way that ours does. It's part of what makes us like Him. So God can't change His mind instantly. He can't say, you know, love them today, kill them tomorrow. he's not changeable like that. In Islam, God doesn't have to be rational. So, the Muslim leadership can declare someone to be persona non grata and order them to be killed. And they can say, God wants this to happen. And then a little while later, they could say, nope, we changed our mind, God doesn't want it to happen. It's a system that lends itself to a political movement. Sadly, one of the things that's very, very odd, for instance, historically, Shia Islam ultimately manages kind of a coup and takes over, and the leadership of the Muslim state becomes Shia. And they were a bit more friendly to Christianity overall than the Sunni majority was. But in the modern world, Shia Islam is controlled by Iran, and they've politicized it. They use it as a political weapon to attack their enemies, in this case, Saudi Arabia. And it's become very politicized. It's not necessarily that way by nature, but it certainly lends itself in that direction. So it's like the text of the Quran, the principles of Islam are a bit ambiguous. You can interpret them like some people are trying to in a spiritual way that allows you to live in harmony and concord with people around you. You can do that, but you have to ignore certain parts or reinterpret them. On the other hand, you can interpret it as the terrorists do, that we're supposed to kill them all and suicide bombers are fine, because the text itself is somewhat ambiguous. And so in Iran, religion is used politically, and sadly used politically as an instrument of repression for their people, which is really tragic. Okay. Modern difficulties. What is Islam? It mixes some elements of Judaism and Christianity and tribal religions. And Christians struggle with this. Some Christian writers will say Islam is a Christian heresy. I would say no. To be a heretic, you have to be part of the same religion. You have to profess yourself to be a Christian and profess things that aren't part of Christianity. The Muslims never claim to be Christians. Certainly claim to be true believers, but to me that doesn't fit the definition of heresy. Like Buddhists aren't Christian heretics. It's a different religion. It's a different sort of beast. But you can find that. Some early church fathers write about Islam as a Christian heresy. I don't think so. Muhammad and his life is complicated. He is a prophet of Islam, but he's not necessarily a good man. He doesn't do any miracles. There's times where he does really problematic things, like ordering his troops to rape and pillage villages. He actually does that. That wouldn't seem to be very founder of religion-esque to me, but he does. In several cases, he tries to enforce wholesale destruction, like the ancient Jewish principle of kill them all that we've talked about in the Old Testament, where they killed everyone, and he does that sometimes. Muhammad is unlike any other prophet of a major religion. Major religions hold up their founders, like Buddhism, the Buddha, Christianity, Jesus, and the apostles, as this sort of pristine example of what it is to practice the religion. Islam doesn't, at least not in the same way. And so there's a complicated history. Is violence inherent to Islam? This is a question that's being asked now. And to a certain extent, in the United States, I think this should be encouraged. This debate within Islam should be encouraged. Is Islam by necessity violent? Is that part of the religion? They have to make a decision. I hope that they'll reject violence as a part of the religion, but it's not clear if they will. Certainly there are Muslim schools of thought that allow violence. You can see some of that in the world today. And I think the final note to end on, one of the really great things that I would encourage you to do is listen to the stories of Muslims who convert to Christianity. Look for them and read them. Some of them are really incredible. There's people that are attacked by their families. There's people who, like one of the great ones that I really enjoy is named Nabil Qureshi. And when he converted to Christianity, his parents disowned him and basically quit talking to him for like a decade. In some cases, they actually physically attacked them. His father celebrated a funeral for his son and said that he didn't exist. His mother talked to him a little bit more. But there's a whole stack of Muslim conversion stories. You can find lots of them on YouTube. There's some very good books about it. And it's pretty impressive. I am not sure that as many of us would be willing to follow Jesus if it meant risking everything and losing your job and your livelihood and having to flee the country. There's a high cost in some cases to following Jesus. But there's also beauty to it. They can narrate what the differences between Christianity and Islam are, and I think they can do so in really positive ways. They can explain some of the challenges of Islam.
Have you ever had anyone at RCIA who was Muslim?
No, I haven't. I visited with a few people. I had a friend when I was a Focus missionary that was a Muslim, kind of a strange Muslim, but a Muslim nonetheless. But he wasn't quite at the place of jumping in and converting. Like I said, for a lot of them it's very hard because it's very cultural, it's very different. There's a lot of challenges in that direction. So like I said, I think this introduction to the rise of Islam is a good place to conclude because it is one of the more significant events that has impacts. This certainly isn't the end of history. This is the first 1,000 years. The book only goes through about the end of the 800s and 900s. It talks about some major figures like Methodius and Cyril and Charlemagne, who it's too bad we didn't have time to get to. But there's so much more. I mean, history is such a vast field. So this is like the end of the history portion. A couple of things that are for your information. The first one is that on the 23rd of June at 6:30, it's going to be a farewell event for me. That's June 23rd at 6:30. It's a Monday evening. So we're not planning on serving supper, but we'd like to have some food and some appetizers. If you would like to come and you're interested in bringing something, let me know. I'm going to end up kind of coordinating it. Lots of people have been asking, and I don't have a place that I'm living yet, so I may be staying here. If I do, there might be a possibility of doing something in an evening next year because my evenings are free. I'll be teaching during the day. So there's some possibility of that. If it happens, it could very likely be on Wednesday evening, but I don't know. A lot of it will depend on choices that the bishop makes. There is Ashley Nia mentioned that she was willing to potentially lead a Bible study and take over a Bible study, but she has a couple of children and would need someone to watch them. So one possibility for you guys to think of, like I was thinking if there would be a few of you, like 3 or 4, that would be willing to trade off and kind of take weeks where you'd have to miss like 1 week in 4. But she basically said if we could solve the childcare problem for her, she would be willing to lead a Bible study. She'd be very good. So that would be one possibility. She's got 2 little kiddos and 2 little boys, and I think they'd be fine. So those are a few things to think about and consider. And I guess for the last little bit, if you want to tackle some of the questions on this, if you have some other questions or some things, I'll probably kind of come around and you can visit. You could talk about what you learned in Bible study, or whatever direction you'd like your conversation to go. Loretta.